The movie begins with a girl named Heather. She is sitting alone in her dimly lit room, watching a movie. The only light that illuminates the room is that of the moon, streaming in from the window overlooking the full moon. Heather looks exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes. As she sits there in a trance, blood starts streaming down her nose. The TV screen goes static, and she crawls away from the moonlight, looking all disoriented with her eyes strangely twinkling in the dark. Her mother calls out to her, but gets no reply. So she comes inside her room and finds it deserted. She sees the full moon from the window and all of a sudden starts to panic. In the same panicked state, she rushes out into the deep snow and keeps calling out to her daughter. As she is looking around, her husband arrives, rushing towards her and telling her to go back inside. Just then, a ferocious beast attacks her from behind and the scene goes black. Fast forward to the present day, we see Heather, who is exercising in her room. All around, there are posters of muscled women flexing their bodies. Amidst all this, there are ominous handcuffs lying on her bed and a book about werewolves hinting at a dark secret. After exercising, Heather goes out and gets her mother into bed. While she is changing her clothes, we see the now healed scars of the previous wolf attack. Later, we see Heather and her dad in her school, where they are caught up in the excitement of a hockey match, cheering on her younger brother as he takes to the ice. After the final buzzer sounds, they head to the locker room. Heather congratulates her brothers for a good match. As they are talking, the hockey coach enters. This rude man immediately starts getting angry at the poor girl, and soon kicks her out for reasons unknown. The poor girl barely manages to ask him to let her try out for the adult team, but the man, without so much as a thought, tells her no. Back at home, Heather and her two little brothers are watching a wrestling show when their mother comes in and tells them that it is time for bed. The boys go off to sleep, while Heather is roped into a mundane task by her mother to go fetch some cigarettes and alcohol. After hesitating for a moment, the girl relents and goes to the store. It's during this dull chore that Heather's path crosses with Jonine. She is grabbing 2 cans of beer and mischievously stuffing them inside her bag. Heather is amused by her shoplifting antics, but doesn't inform the shopkeeper. While looking at her, she mistakenly drops the bottle of liquor that she holds, inadvertently aiding in Jonine's escape. After buying her mother's goods, she comes out to find Jonine with her boyfriend, drinking the beer that she just stole. They drive off, with her passing a fleeting smile to Heather, making the latter quite pleased. The next day, at the ice skating rink where Heather works, Jonine reappears. There they greet and talk to each other for the first time. Jonine asks if she works there and tells her that she just changed her practice center to here. Their conversation is cut short by the arrival of the coach, who takes Jonine away for her warm-up. Heather also watches her skate from afar. There, she notices the poor girl facing a hard time. Later, Heather finds her crying and smoking alone outside. Feeling sad for Jonine, she goes to sit beside her. There, she finds out that Jonine doesn't have a very good relationship with her father, who happens to be her coach as well. It turns out, after a bad practice session, he left her there and went back home alone. Feeling sorry for the girl, Heather offers to get her a drink. They go to the storeroom where they have a few cans of beer and discuss how Jonine got her name. Soon, before things begin to heat up, Heather's nose starts to bleed, cutting their drinking party short. Returning home, Heather finds her dad standing outside, waiting on her. He gives her a sobering warning about her curfew time. Inside, he tells her that she should be careful around this time of the month when the moon is full. She apologizes and promises not to repeat her mistake again. She then asks her father not to tell her mother about this. He looks at her and promises to keep her secret. As he is talking, all of a sudden, his eyes change color, turning eerie like an animal. After he goes out, Heather grabs the handcuffs. She shackles herself in them and prepares to go off to sleep. Just then, her father opens the door and bids her a good night. He then shuts and locks the door from outside, as if Heather poses a threat to them. The following morning, Heather wakes up early and engages in some ice hockey practice. As the family gathers around the TV later, they hear the news about an upcoming lunar eclipse. The atmosphere suddenly turns tense as Heather's mother worriedly looks at her daughter. Heather looks stressed too. Afterwards, the siblings go off to play ice hockey, where their father observes them happily. Spending a cheerful day together, the family returns home for dinner. That evening, Jonine calls Heather's landline. The girl is ecstatic to hear that Jonine has reached out to her. As she happily answers the call, the girl on the other side urges her for a night out together. She is initially reluctant. She constantly looks out at the full moon and contemplates her choices. But after she hears Jonine say that she wants to see her, she throws all caution to the wind. Excited by the prospect of a night out, Heather borrows her dad's jacket, only to receive a cutting remark from her mother about her appearance. She then tells her that she can't go out as the time is not right. But her daughter begs her to let her go, as she would be back before midnight. In a weak moment, her mom expresses her disappointment, longing for the closeness they once shared. Yet, despite the tension, she hands Heather her watch. It is a symbol of trust, and sets a curfew of midnight. Finally, feeling happy and eager to meet Jonine, Heather eagerly rushes out. After buying booze, she hops into the car with Jonine and her crew, setting off for a night at the casino. On the way there, the group pops some pills, heightening their sense of adventure. They finally reach the casino, where Heather finds everything deafeningly loud. Inside the bustling atmosphere, Heather finds herself spiraling into a bad state, while Otto gets into a fight after losing at a game. He is thrown out, after which he approaches a worried and tripping Heather. The woman looks at her arms that have grown animal-like hairs and quickly covers them reflexively. In the same tipsy state, she approaches Jonine, who is losing herself in the rhythm of the music, dancing without a care. Suddenly, the shrill sound of her alarm pierces through the haze, signaling the impending curfew. It is almost midnight. Panic grips Heather as she realizes the urgency of the situation. She tells Otto and Jonine that they have to go back as she is late, but the couple laugh it off. Who goes back home before midnight while out partying? She understands that the two have no plan of going back whatsoever. Thus, she rushes off. On the way back, her stomach churns violently as she vomits blood. Her eyes also change color as if any minute she would transform into an entirely different being. With a sense of desperation, Heather groans out in frustration and runs, her legs carrying her frantically through the night. The cold air stings her lungs as she races home, her mind clouded with fear and desperation. The scene shifts, revealing Heather's mother, who is anxiously and almost fearfully waiting for her daughter's return. Back in the snowy woods, we see the poor girl fall into the snow, her body almost battered and broken. The next morning, Heather's mother discovers her daughter at the front door, and shivering, wrapped in a thin blanket. Bruises mark her shivering, cold body. She rushes towards the girl and drags her inside, putting her to bed. Later, after she wakes up, Heather finds her mother crying and vomiting in the washroom. As she gingerly approaches, the woman lashes out at her to get away. Afterwards, Heather goes to her part-time job, where she runs into Jonine once more. When the girl inquires about the bruise on her face, Heather deflects the question, telling her that it is just something she got from falling over on ice. As they are talking, their conversation is cut short by the arrival of Rick, Jonine's boyfriend. It seems the woman was waiting for him out in the cold, while he was taking his sweet time coming over. Such a nice man. As she gets up to go, Jonine expresses her desire to spend more time with Heather. Back at home, Henry's concern for Heather's well-being spills over as he admonishes her about the dangers of wandering the night freely. His worry etches deep in his voice. Heather, feeling the weight of her father's words, lashes out in frustration, imploring him to understand her perspective. For years, she has lived under the suffocating confines of her parents' strict curfew, a barrier that denies her the freedom enjoyed by her peers. She longs to embrace life's pleasures without the looming constraints of her room, and the chains that bind her. That night, she dreams of Jonine, not a very respectful dream either. It seems she has caught feelings for the girl. The next day, she invites the girl to visit her home. Jonine arrives, and is amused by the funny interaction among her father and little brothers. As the boys and her father go away, Jonine notices scratch marks all around the furniture, and wonders if they have a dog around the house. As they are walking around the house, their conversation is cut short by Patty's interruption. The older woman creates a scene, speaking harshly to Jonine and cautioning her to leave. Patty's words cut deep, as she asserts that she doesn't truly understand Heather. The two then decide to go and spend time alone in Heather's car. There she tells Jonine how her mother is mostly like this. She would get drunk and wasted, and then pass out somewhere inside the house. The next day, amidst all the chaos, a glimmer of hope emerges for Heather as she receives some much-needed good news. The coach has finally granted her permission to try out for the hockey team's selection trials next week. Later, as she spends more time with her, Heather finds herself increasingly drawn to Jonine, forging a deep bond with her. Her feelings increase and multiply as she indulges in fantasies of a life together. She watches her show and cheers for Jonine. The next day, Jonine accompanies her to watch her brother's hockey match. Their cheerful day turns gloomy when Patty once more invades their good time and starts throwing a tantrum. As her drunk behavior starts getting out of control, Henry quickly grabs her and takes her back home. Jonine feels bad for poor Heather and accompanies her back home, even comforting her as she tries to sleep through the shouts and fights in her house. The next day, in the ice hockey rink, Heather finds Jonine with her boyfriend. Despite her longing, Heather is tormented by the knowledge that Jonine is in a relationship with Rick, a man who is controlling and fails to appreciate her worth. She finds the two arguing and approaches the girl to quell their fight, but to no avail. As she goes to trials with her mind filled with thoughts of Jonine, her entire gameplay gets messed up. Sad and defeated, she rushes back home. There, she gets a call from Jonine who asks about the trials. However, Heather is just too sad to speak about it yet. Thus, they decide to meet and cheer each other up. Heather picks her up, and they play around drinking. Jonine's feelings for Heather gradually begin to blossom, and they find solace and comfort in each other's company. After drinking, they go to a bar to party with their friends. As their closeness deepens, they give in to their desires, unable to resist the pull of their mutual attraction. Yet, Heather's newfound happiness is short-lived when, unbeknownst to her, her brothers discover her relationship with Jonine. The next day, as she goes to practice with them, their disdain is quite visible, yet the woman doesn't know why they are acting like that. Feeling the weight of their judgment, Heather's distress is compounded when even Jonine begins to distance herself from her, leaving her desperate and alone. Despite her efforts to reach out to Jonine, all of Heather's attempts are met with silence. Even a visit to Jonine's house proves futile, as her father coldly turns her away, refusing to entertain her questions or provide any solace. With her eyes tearing up and her world crumbling around her, Heather rushes back home. There she tries to busy herself with her workout, as she is left to confront the painful reality of her shattered dreams. Henry notices his daughter's turmoil and decides to step up. That night, he comes into Heather's room, asking if she is all right. To lighten up her mood, he tells her that she is very precious, so whoever is doing all this to her just doesn't deserve her. Then he takes her outside to appreciate the moon. As they are watching it, her father turns around and says how the moon holds so much power over them. When he was a kid, he used to want to rip that moon out of the sky. He once wanted to be all alone too, but then he could not bring himself to stay away from Heather's mother. He sighs and tells her how lucky he is now to have them all. The man looks at his tearful daughter and tells her to remain strong. Someday, someone would come along who is going to accept all of Heather, including the good and the bad parts. After making sure that his daughter's mood is a bit better, the duo decides to retire to bed for the night. Back in her room, Heather thinks back on the night she spent with Jonine. The night all of her dreams crumbled. She remembers how intimate they were when all of a sudden, her body had begun to transform. Her pupils had changed color, and her teeth had elongated into fangs. A strange blurry image of a beast materializes in her memory, with the voice of a scared Jonine calling out, asking what she is. Tears start streaming down her face as Heather recalls all this, and she starts sobbing. The next day, however, despite everything, Heather refuses to give up and decides to keep trying. After persistent attempts, she finally manages to reach Jonine on the phone. They awkwardly greet each other and ask how they have been doing. After contemplating for a while, Heather extends an invitation to hang out. To her surprise, Jonine reveals that she can't go out with her since she would be going to a party at Rick's house. Heather's heart stings, yet she clamps down on her feelings. After a moment, Jonine invites her to join them at the party. Despite her initial hesitation, Heather decides to attend, eager to salvage their connection. That night, Heather makes her way to Rick's house. Upon arriving at the party, she finds a scared Jonine sitting beside Rick. She does not look happy at all. Seeing Heather, Rick's mood turns sour, and he swears. The girl ignores him and approaches Jonine, asking how she is, but she is sadly met with a cold shoulder from the latter. She averts her eyes, unable to look at Heather. Despite the tears welling in her eyes, betraying her true feelings of hurt and confusion, she seems distant and disinterested. The group engages in conversation, talking about this and that. They look at Jonine and muse that her mother must be hot. She snaps at them, saying that her mother has already passed away. Then, in the same flippant tone, she tells them about how Heather's mother is a drunkard. She shares the vulnerable yet disturbing stories that Heather had trusted her with. This hits poor Heather hard. Hurriedly, Heather leaves the party and goes to sit alone outside. After a while, with a tear-streaked face, Jonine also comes out. She tells Heather that she is not gay, thus Heather should just get over her and move on. As Heather is processing her words, Rick comes out and urgently ushers the scared Jonine back inside. When the girl goes in, he slams the door shut in Heather's face. Back at home, the sense of heartbreak and betrayal weighs heavily on Heather, leaving her shattered and lost. She cries miserably, thinking what must have gone wrong and where. Her mother hears her crying out in misery and comes in to console her. After a while of struggle and thrashing around, she finally manages to calm her daughter down. She then goes out to breathe fresh air under the night sky. Later, Heather is out with her father in his workplace. As she grapples with Jonine's sudden distance, all of a sudden, a far more devastating blow strikes her life. Her father collapses, suffers a heart attack, and tragically passes away, leaving Heather and her family reeling in grief. Henry had been the pillar of strength in her life, and his loss feels insurmountable. That night, the family holds a small funeral. Turns out, after passing, Henry had transformed into a lycanthrope. Heather is racked with guilt as she carries the body and lies it down near a bonfire that they have created. The family is all gathered around the fire and are mourning their father's demise. Patty calls the boys over to say their final goodbyes to their father. Afterwards, they throw the body into the bonfire and burn it to ashes. Henry's demise fundamentally changes Heather, plunging her into a sea of bitterness and resentment. She grapples with overwhelming loneliness, feeling as though the world has turned its back on her in her darkest hour. After the funeral, Heather heads to the washroom and, in a fit of rage, cuts off her hair. All of a sudden, blood starts to drip down her nose. As she comes out into the living room, her brothers are shocked to see the change. Adding to her anguish, Heather's brothers begin to point fingers at her, blaming her for their father's untimely demise. Her brother calls her a heartless woman. He says that their father must have found out about her little affair, and the shock must have taken his life. The accusations deepen Heather's pain and isolation, leaving her feeling abandoned and betrayed. Angry, the girl slaps her brother. Soon the boys get into a fight, and chaos ensues. Patty hears the noise and rushes out to find her children fighting. She attempts to calm her sons. Heather takes this moment and runs out to breathe fresh air. Patty calls out from behind, asking her to stop, but the girl doesn't listen. She quickly runs out, unaware of the impending danger lurking in the shadows. The moon is full in all its glory. Soon it starts to get red. It turns out, today is the eclipse that was predicted in the news a few weeks back. Not knowing, or perhaps knowingly ignoring the consequences, Heather arrives at the bar where she used to come with Jonine. She sits at the bar and gloomily drinks a beer. The watch on her wrist keeps beeping the midnight alarm, yet she ignores it. Her arms keep itching, and the hairs seem to have grown out a little longer than normal. All of a sudden, she is approached by Otto, who was watching her for a while. He tells her to go out for a smoke. Her heart skips a beat as her eyes unexpectedly find Jonine and Rick. Otto tries to grab her attention once more, saying they should ignore them and go out, but the girl refuses him. She forcefully puts the bottle on the counter and walks towards the couple. Heather then confronts Jonine, telling her that she cannot just pretend not to know her. Watching her vulnerable state, Jonine gets worried and asks if she is okay. Rick seems to notice Heather, and Jonine rushes to tell her to leave. The girl, however, refuses to heed her advice. Her defiance only earns her a forcible escort from Rick. Everyone else stays back except Rick and his two friends, who bully Heather outside. Pushed to her limits by Rick's aggression, the woman spits back. She calls him a coward for being aggressive with his girlfriend. It doesn't make him look tough, but rather pathetic. Fueled by a simmering anger, Heather questions his masculinity, provoking him to the point of no return. In a horrifying twist, Rick loses control, unleashing a brutal on Heather with a cue stick. He tells his other two friends to go in and lock the door until he knocks, and begins assaulting Heather. As the moon ascends to its full glory, casting an eerie light upon the scene, Heather undergoes a chilling transformation. All of a sudden, hairs start to rapidly grow all over her body, and her eyes change color. With a guttural roar, she finally morphs into a powerful wolf, her instincts sharpen from the taste of blood. With savage determination, she dispatches Rick, leaving behind a trail of carnage as she flees into the sanctuary of the nearby woods. In the meantime, Jonine stays inside the restroom, cowering in fear. She hears the toe-curling noise coming from outside, yet she does not dare leave. The following morning, Heather awakens in her room, her body and drenched in blood. Soon her mother Patty arrives and tends to her wounds with a mix of fear and concern. As soon as she is done, Patty, fearing for Heather's safety, delivers a stern warning. She tells her to flee their home as it is no longer safe for her here. Later, the news of Rick's demise is plastered all over the television. The authorities conducted an experiment and concluded that it was a lone wolf that attacked the guy. Turns out, there were witnesses who saw a large dog flee the scene after the incident. They are not wrong. The police have even given out instructions on what to do if anyone happens to come in contact with the creature. In the wake of her mother's grim counsel and the events regarding the investigation, Heather grapples with a fateful decision. With resolve in her heart and uncertainty shrouding her future, she finally decides to leave the town behind. The movie ends with Heather boarding her car and embarking on a journey into the unknown, guided by nothing but the primal instincts coursing through her veins.